Welcome to the show, All Things Writing. I am your host, Brian the Writer. Let me take you on a journey through my writing life and introduce you to some of the amazing talent that exists in the writing world. Whether you are looking for a little advice or just to catch an interesting interview, sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. All Things Writing starts now. Hey everybody, and welcome to the show, All Things Writing. I am your host, Brian the Writer, Brian Nowak, if you'd like. I want to thank you very much for joining me on YouTube. I really hope you guys enjoy the content. I see there's a lot of downloads, so a lot of people are watching the show, and I definitely appreciate that. We've got some wonderful guests lined up coming online that I'm just in the process of negotiating times with and that kind of thing. So I don't want to give you any names, but they're pretty amazing. Now, speaking of pretty amazing, all of you who have done so already, I want to thank you because you're amazing. You've hit that subscribe button, and I really, really do appreciate it. Now, what I'm going to ask you to do is those of you who have not subscribed, and there are some of you out there, please hit that subscribe button. That's all I'm going to ask. It's very, very simple. It allows me to do things like I am about to do today. I have a guest for everyone that I think you're going to like. Now, my guest and I have a lot of things in common. First of all, not only is she a fellow author, but she's also a fellow Chicagoan. She's from Chicago, so I really, really appreciate that. But unlike me, she is a best-selling author. She has 6 novels to her name. I've got more than that, but I am not a best-selling author, but she can make that claim. She's reached over 2 million people. Can you believe that? 2 million people. I'm hoping after the show comes out, it'll be 2 million and one. You know, who knows? We can dream, can't we? She's a 2-time Whitney Award finalist as well. She's been on the Amazon charts and the Wall Street Journal bestseller list. So I want to welcome to the show my wonderful guest today. Thank you for joining me, Miss Emily Bleeker. Emily, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. I'm excited to be here.
Oh, you know what? It's my pleasure. I sometimes can't believe that people actually want to come on the show and spend time with me. I'm sometimes amazed that that's even a thing. And repeat guests. People want to come out again.
It's
It kind
time.
of blows my mind. So I'm going to tell you a story, Emily. I just recently came back from Italy. Not my first time in Italy, actually. But it's certainly not my last. My wife and I, we were there for a little while. We came home and we agreed that we were going to do it again next year. But I understand you have some connections to Italy, at least in terms of, your writing materials. So I can what? Well, before we get to that, I made a mistake. I always, and forgive me, viewers, because I know I did things wrong. Emily, why don't you tell us all about yourself? See, now the longtime viewers are going to ding me on that for not saying that first. But why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I mean, I'm here because I'm an author. My 7th book just came out. I know, yay, hooray. I also do improv in my spare time, and I have 4 kids and have lots of pets, and so we stay pretty busy over here.
I was about to say, that's a lot of hobbies.
Yeah.
That's a lot of hobbies. No, children are not hobbies. However, they take a lot of time. I know I have 3 myself, and thankfully they're all grown up, so I don't have to deal with them anymore. So as I was babbling on about incoherently a moment ago, just like a drunk guy wandering out of a bar muttering stuff about Italy, but I went to Italy recently, and so you have connections to Italy. How did that actually happen that became a fodder for your writing?
A couple of things. I mean, my husband is 100% Sicilian, so that was definitely learned a lot from him and from his family. So, and then also the whole POW camp side of things. My dad just made a comment years ago where he was like, hey, your grandma worked in an Italian POW camp and fell in love with an Italian priest there. That was like what he said. And I was like, all of those words don't make sense. Let me find out what that means a little bit more. And so that's kind of where this idea came from for looking into Italian POW camps on US soil during World War II.
And of course, we're talking about your latest novel to have just come
Yes,
out.
yes.
There's it's kind of interesting that you kind of went that direction with that book. I'm going to get to that question. Well, I mean, I'll get to it now. Why historical fiction? Okay, so before with that, what's the name of the book?
It's called When We Were Enemies.
Okay.
So, and it's just talking about that summer in 1943 before Italy switched sides and we became allies. So, it is that period of time that we were enemies. It is half contemporary fiction and half historical. And I usually write contemporary fiction. So, it was kind of a new turn for me to write half historical, but it just was what was needed to tell the story, I thought. So I'm like, let's go ahead and figure out how to do this. And actually, my next book is entirely historical. So I don't like sticking with just one particular subgenre very long. It's what works for the story that I'm pursuing, and this is what's working for the story that I'm pursuing. So,
So you tell your story your way.
yeah. Yeah, I tell it the way it needs to be told. I don't know that we could have told this story appropriately only from a contemporary timeline.
When you were going through this process, and I love history. I'm a fan of history, which
Yeah.
makes makes going to Italy and Europe and all those places all the more interesting. As you were, I was going to ask. So your grandmother's Sicilian,
No, my
my
husband's grandma
or
is.
your husband's grandmother.
Her
So
parents too.
my great grandparents came from, or great grandmother came from Palermo.
Oh, okay.
So
I cannot remember where his parents came from. I will ask,
it's just
but it's close. It's close. It's a small town, and they came over after his brother was born and before he was born. So like it was very, very close to him not being born in America either. But
that's so cool.
yeah.
Well, so as you were digging through We Were Enemies, did uh, did you discover things that you didn't know before? I mean, I guess what were some of the more interesting things that you came across?
Well, tons of new things, Like originally, I didn't even know about the whole POW camps on US soil. That was probably the first thing digging into. Just learning the specific details of Italy surrendering and then, switching sides. And then the POWs also switching side. About 90% of them ended up in the Italian service unit and
Mhm.
were actually members of the US Army for the rest of the war. Because according to the Geneva Convention, they couldn't send the prisoners back to a war torn country,
Correct.
and Italy was still occupied by Germany. And so they stayed, they worked here, and the small 10% who stayed loyal to fascism went to a small prison actually a large prison in Texas with some more intense German soldiers as well. And that's where they were kept till the end of the war. So I learned a lot of new things that I didn't know any of those
Mhm.
details prior to this. I loved digging in. I loved finding out how closely America followed the rules of the Geneva Convention.
Mhm.
Like they were like, hey, we made up these rules. We all agreed on them. Maybe we should follow them. And it really was almost this like slightly manipulative sounds negative, but the strategic idea of if we follow the rules, hopefully our men will get treated in a like manner. And unfortunately, that it wasn't reciprocal. But because of that, and actually the army and the government, the U.S. government got some flack from
Mhm.
American citizens at first because they're like, we're really treating these prisoners really, really well.
Yeah.
But as the prisoners they worked in their local communities. People got to know them, and it became something that was more understood.
Mhm.
So,
So you have in the book. So
yeah.
I always say that on all things writing, we don't do spoilers. We just don't do that. However, so in the book, there's two young women,
Hmm.
and they are connected by history and DNA. They share this experience, this connection. How did you decide that that was going to be that focal point for telling your story?
They're so the grandmother and the granddaughter. I don't think that's too spoilery to talk about at
I
all.
Now, to be fair, any author that's on the show can spoiler books all they want. On the other hand, I just try to avoid it.
Yes, yes. So, grandmother, granddaughter. I love this idea that Vivian Snow is becomes a Hollywood icon, and the present day timeline knows that. So we already know the end of Vivian's story,
Mhm.
but we're seeing this like little pocket of time before she became famous and what that looked like. And so for me, I found that very interesting, especially because the modern day storyline, the granddaughter was kind of rejecting this generational fame that had been passed down, and she was feeling conflicted about where that came from and how far it was getting into her family and how comfortable she felt with that. But then you also look back at Vivian Snow when she's Vivian Santini still, and you see what her life could have been without it.
Yeah.
So I liked that idea of like trying to figure out like what are the sacrifices of fame,
Mhm.
as well as what are the triumphs of it, I guess.
I think that's a really interesting thought. We don't often think in terms of famous people who have that hanging off them. You
Yeah.
really have you have no privacy. You have no. There's a lot of things that come along. You're paying a heavy price for that fame.
Right.
So
And also like because it's through generations, it's kind of like those nepo babies, where it is something that she talks about a lot. She is a PR, Elise, that's the modern day timeline. She is like a publicist, like a PR specialist for the rich and famous.
mhm.
And so it's another layer where she's out of the spotlight, but she's still working with famous people and the ups and downs of fame, and she gets to see the manipulative side of fame, which I also found very interesting to dig into.
Yeah. So I guess that's a really good point to ask. This is a really good point to ask the question. Uh, I write horror, mystery, and science fiction. Why did you focus in on historical fiction?
So I love, actually, sci-fi is my favorite. It's my favorite genre. I was writing multiple different genres when I started out, and Wreckage in my first contemporary fiction, like book club fiction kind of a book, got picked
Mhm.
up. And
Yeah.
so I remember my agent came to me and was like, all right, what else have you got? And I sent her, I think at that time I was working on a fantasy novel, and I sent it to her and she's like, no, 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 no. More like this, So she's like, "This is working for you. Let's stick with it." And so I still have plenty of stories that I'm playing around with, that I've written, that are in a drawer, that one day will probably get addressed. But there's only so much writing you can do
Yeah.
in a day, and this is my full-time job. I'm lucky for that. So I'm like, I will definitely keep focusing in on this, and I'm still finding passion in it. Thankfully I still have enough wiggle room within this genre to find the stories that really speak to me.
It's kind of funny because we were talking about the price of fame earlier, and there's a price of trad publishing, and that yes, yeah, it's great to get that paycheck. It's great to have that team behind you, but in some ways, you said it yourself. It's like no, 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 not that. We want more of this, and it's
Yeah.
like, but no, I want to chase that shiny penny over there that's in my mind. It's just interesting because as an indie, I don't think of the world that way necessarily.
Right.
I'm like, I chase whatever happened to be in my mind at the time, but it doesn't always work out as well as I hope. So I guess there's
Right.
two kinds to the. I just came back from 20 Books Las Vegas, which is
Mm,
the
yeah.
big indie convention. So tops on my mind right now, I guess. But I have to hand it to you. You're very much what's it what's the actors when the actors go out and they really live the experience. You
Method.
method acting, yes, you're a method writer. You went to an actual internment camp. Now I've been to one, so what was that like for you?
Oh, I like doing that as much as possible because I also act, and I feel like that, I say that improv is writing on stage and
Yeah.
drafting is acting on paper,
Mhm.
so like they're opposite sides of the same coin in a lot of ways. And so I really love going any place that can really make me feel things, understand a perspective, see what it was like. So it was a tiny little town. It was actually really funny because I reached out to like the Facebook group, the town Facebook group ahead of time. And I was like, oh, is there anybody that I could talk to? I got blocked on there right away. And at first I was like, oh no, I am going to be there tomorrow. Is there going to be a mob waiting for me? Like, what is going on? Did I do this wrong? They ended up reaching out to me a little bit later and being like, it was a misunderstanding. But there was definitely a moment where I was like, uh oh. But it was fascinating. It was amazing to see. I wrote specifically about that camp and about
Okay.
the chapel that was built there. So Italian prisoners built a chapel on the like the prison premises, and that's actually part of what the whole story is about, is the building of that chapel. And so it was pretty amazing to go there and see that, to see the actual work that was done, the things that I was talking about. And there were definite moments in the book that wouldn't have happened if I had not made that trip. And so I definitely try and do that whenever possible so that I can really get into it. Like I wrote it wasn't this book, a book where someone worked in a morgue. And so I
Mhm.
went to a morgue. It was actually a cadaver lab, but still there were lots of dead bodies.
Mhm.
I wanted to know what it felt like to like pop that handle and to pull the drawer out and what the sights and smells were. And it was amazing. And
Mhm.
actually it was quite moving. Like it made me choke up
Yeah. Yeah.
seeing all that.
That's cool. I mean, that's a good way to write. You've got to be able to actually draw from your own experiences to make that authentic connection with your readers. And it sounds like you're totally in on that.
Yeah, as much
Uh,
as you can. I mean, obviously we make stuff up all the time too,
sure. Yeah.
but it's that bit of authenticity. It's just like those nibbles of authenticity that then give us room
Hmm.
to make up the rest of it.
Hmm. Yeah, absolutely. So a little bird put it into my ear to ask about the Italian priest in your
Yes.
book. So is this a relative of yours? How did you come across this person?
So there are two of them. We decided to go all in with Italian priests. So the idea came from the comment my dad made about my grandma. My grandma was married to my grandpa at the time, and it was not a salacious affair that she had with this Italian priest. But she met an Italian priest who was imprisoned in the POW camp there where she worked, and they became friends.
Hmm.
And my dad always says they fell in love, but it was a platonic kind of a love
Hmm.
where they wrote back and forth. He drew postcards for her. He was an artist, and he would draw postcards and send them to her with just a sentence or two, and for the rest of his life. And so they were close friends in that way. So that's kind of where the idea started, and I'm like, what do I want to do with this idea? And I'm really into maybe challenging the idea of I don't know how to say it, traditional faith ideas,
Yeah.
perhaps. So I really liked that this was an avenue of doing that as well, of saying like what does faith really mean? Like what are some of the sacrifices of faith as
Hmm.
well as fame?
Yeah. Yeah.
So
I
that's
think,
kind of where they came from.
yeah, I was just actually, it's funny you mentioned the faith element. I was just thinking about my experience in Italy, where you go in churches and chapels and things like that, and altars of all different sorts play such an integral role in that life, in the life over there. I
Yeah.
would think that if you're an Italian imprisoned here, that would become something that helps ground you to a certain extent.
Yes, and it was one of the rules in the Geneva Conventions. So
Mhm.
it was a rule that you had to provide worship for the prisoners. And so that's why they were able to build this chapel. And it actually, ironically, was like dedicated the week that Italy like switched sides and they were leaving
Wow.
then, and they left it behind, and the Germans didn't really use it, so because Germans came into that same camp after the Italians left. And Germany is not a faith-based culture really, but the Italians were, so it was a very
Hmm.
important part of that for them, and that is why that chapel was built.
Oh, that is so cool.
Yeah.
So I did a little bit of digging into your background, like a super sleuth that I am. I'm kidding. I'm not. Uh, Now, I know you do some work with Operation Allies.
Oh, so that was in the book. Operation Allies Welcome is was kind of like the modern day parallel, was how I kind of saw it,
Hmm.
like, so that Camp Atterbury,
Hmm.
um, after the we pulled out of Afghanistan,
Hmm.
they opened their camp to any refugees from
Hmm.
Afghanistan, and it was called Operation Allies Welcome.
Hmm.
And they provided housing and transition,
Hmm.
different services, and some therapy, honestly, for families that were escaping Afghanistan.
Hmm.
And that was only a couple of years ago,
Hmm.
and that
Sure.
was a successful program there as well. And it was these same facilities where the this previous story, the 1943 story, took place.
That's cool.
Yeah.
It's just interesting that we have that kind of timeline, from the 1940s. I can see how that drives kind of your historical perspective a little bit.
Yeah.
You know, so you do all these things. You have tons of other hobbies as well. So I am going to stop on the improv thing. How did you get into that?
It was, I did theater in high school, and then I
Mhm.
stopped for a very long time. And
Mhm.
I made some goals for my 30s, after I had cancer in my 20s. And
Mhm.
so when I made it to 30, I was like, hooray, I should probably do something with this time. One of the things was writing a novel. I
Mhm.
wanted to write one. I didn't know if I'd ever publish it. In fact, I thought I
Sure.
probably wouldn't. Another was to get on stage. And so I just took an improv class, and
Mhm.
then I took another, and then I took another, and then I took another. And after I took all of the improv classes I could take at my local theater, I auditioned for the house team. And I've been on that team for 5 years now.
Oh, very cool. Very
Yeah.
cool. So I did a lot of theater in college.
Oh, that's
And
great.
I always think that it's interesting. It's kind of an infectious thing once you start to get used to it.
It
Start to grow
absolutely is.
from there. So I know you have 4 kids.
Yes.
You mentioned that, and you've got your other things that you do. But of course, this is all things writing. We talk about writing. When are you finding time to write?
Well, it's my job, so
Mhm.
it's my actually it's a mantra that I have to say around my house a lot. It's my job. So that's what I tell my kids. That's what I tell everyone is I'm like, these it is hard. You do have to, I think anybody who works from home has to do
Yeah.
it, but you do have to be defend your territory basically, and make sure that I just try and communicate clearly. It does not always work. That's whenever anybody's like, "Oh, have you mastered it?" I'm like, "No, no, no. I'm nowhere close to mastering writing with like kids at home or
Yeah.
whatever." But really, it is just by standing very firm, like, and myself telling myself, "This is your job." You are giving myself permission to be like, actually, I need to work now,
Mhm.
you know? So
Yeah.
that's really the only way it gets done.
Yeah, I know as an indie and being a guy who has another job, I always set aside time first thing in the morning just for writing. So it's really important that you have to set aside that specific time frame where
Yep.
you're writing. Just out of curiosity, though, uh, when you're writing during the day, do you find that you write in a block or are you writing in sections throughout the day?
It's changed over time.
Hmm.
So lately, this book and the book that I just finished, I tried a new method of just trying to sit and write until I got my words done.
Hmm.
And it actually worked a lot better for me this time around. But it took a lot more finagling to get there. Like I had to make sure I was all settled. Like I had the things I needed to get done. I already did my emails, my Facebook posts, whatever I
Wow.
had scheduled for the day. And I already usually worked out whatever I needed to get done first. And then I settled in, got my words done, knew what I wanted to get done,
Hmm.
I also do a lot of thinking the like night before, or if I'm
Yeah.
laying in bed and can't sleep, or when I wake up in the morning, I rarely need an alarm. I want to think through it all first before I write it down. And as long as I got that done, then I
Hmm.
pretty much could sit down and finish those words in, the chunk of time that I allowed myself. So that was a little new. Like I used to just get it here and there, and it works that way
Hmm.
too. But I felt like I got a better product, like
Sure.
I didn't have to, it was more consistent. And I really liked what I wrote more often when
Hmm.
I did it this way. So hopefully I'll
Yeah.
be able to keep doing it. But I do think that it was like all the preparatory work that I would do ahead of time that made it so that I could sit for that amount of time.
Yeah.
You know?
I always think it's important to point out that if you can write one book, uh, you can write 30 because you've proven that you can do it one time. That means you can do it again and again and again and again.
Right.
Was there a point where you realized you're like, wait a minute, I'm a writer. This is my day now. This is my life now. Was there a point, or was it just a kind of a slow burn to where you went, hey, wait a minute?
Well, I'm remarried now, but I was a single mom for
Mm.
most of the time that I was an author. And so once it became my responsibility to feed my children, like that definitely is a driving force
Yeah.
where it took me 3.5 years to write my first book as I was a stay-at-home mom but to write nonstop, like to write to feed your family is a whole different
Yeah.
thing. And so that definitely kept me going, kept me,
Hmm.
pursuing all of my goals, my next steps, and everything.
Yeah. And can we just point out, apparent you have a goal as well, to collect guitars and ukuleles, because that's uh, that's an impressive
Couple,
collection behind
there's
you.
more over there.
So I have to ask why.
The guitars are mine. The ukuleles are my husband's. So we kind of just mushed them all together. Also, they look cuter this way than just in a bag,
They kind yes, they do. That's an impressive. I mean, I have firearms behind me on my wall and a 1946 telephone.
This is
So
our music room. So like we got our piano, we got this over here. So I'm like, it's my office, but it's like five different things at the same time. So
I didn't have an office until COVID hit, and then all of a sudden I was at home for work for 256 days. You know what happens in 256 days? This is what happens in 256 days. But it all works.
yes.
Um, so along with your hobbies, you're writing, but again, no spoilers on all things writing. But so what are you working on now?
So I am actually working on a companion piece to this book, which is my first time ever doing this. It is Vivian Snow's story. I told you we only talked about before she got famous. Well, the next book is the whole rest of her life that you don't get. So
Mhm.
you get to see her rise to fame, her ongoing relationship with Trombello, which is the Italian priest, and those postcards that I talked about that my grandmother exchanged with the Italian priest, that's how they now communicate. So each chapter starts with a postcard, and then we get to see what happens in their friendship as it goes through her fame story.
Do you have the postcards?
I
Oh,
wish I
that's
did.
unfortunate. Yeah,
I know. I know.
that would be a cool piece.
It really would. It really would. I've definitely asked all family members I can think of if they have it. So it's just my dad's recollection. And then my cousin, I guess, saw them, but my grandmother passed away many, many years ago.
Hmm.
So we lost most of the items that were from her. So
Oh. How
Yeah.
it would be such a cool thing to have. Yeah.
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 It would.
Well, I mean, that's very cool. So you had mentioned the possibility of doing like a some historical pieces later on. Do you have a
So
plan
this
for
is
the
the
books you want to do?
historical, this is the next one that is 6 decades. So
Okay.
that is what this next one covers. It was a little bit of a wild ride researching all of those decades and
Okay.
swooshing them into one book, but hopefully it works.
Do you do a lot of research on this then?
Oh, heck yeah. Tons and tons and tons of research.
So how are you going about that? I mean, let's say there's somebody who is listening to this and unlike me does so in horror I do some research, but it's all set in one era, one time span, sometimes only a couple days versus a historical fiction piece, which is much longer. How are you doing that research and keeping your notes together?
That's a good question. It is something newer for me. Like I've always loved research, but sometimes you get lost in research. And
Yes. Fall
so
down the rabbit hole.
absolutely. So I've kind of realized that I need to have like a base knowledge of what era I'm writing about, like kind of a semi-shallow base, but just enough that things won't sound crazy. Like if I'm going to write something about an airplane and airplanes didn't exist, then I need to make sure I know that airplanes existed. But then there's a second layer of research that I do. And that's after I've written the whole book. So anytime I have something that I don't know for sure, like I don't know the name of, I don't know the technical details, then I just put in a placeholder. I just put in QQQ, and then I put in what I need to research instead of stopping, so that I can just keep going. And then at the end of the book, after I've done my first draft, I go back to each of those places and I do the deep dive. And I find out each of those pieces of information I need to find out. And that's just the work I do ahead of time. There's also, of course, like copy edits through the editor where they go and
Sure.
do research too, and they double check all of my stuff and then point out where my errors are, which always, I have never turned in something that hasn't had some sort of
Yeah.
continuity error, something that had historical error, which is fine. That's what editing is for. So there's lots, definitely. I also like I'm not Catholic, so I sent the book to several people who are Catholic to say, hey, will you read this? And will you let me know, like, does this ring true? Is there anything? And they picked up
Sure.
several things that definitely I didn't phrase correctly, or I was using the wrong terminology, or whatever it was. So it's good to have some readers ahead of time, specialty readers that can kind of be like, oh, hey, here's something else.
Yeah, it's always good to have research, but it's always good to have people who can look at your research and go, no, not quite right.
Exactly.
Yeah, I have a small core of forensic pathologists who can answer all my crazy questions like how many pounds of pressure does it take to crush a human skull, that kind of thing, But you
Yes.
have to have those quirky people on the sidelines for you when you do this
Oh,
kind of
yeah.
research. But yeah, yeah.
Or else you'll have readers who email you at some point and go, hey, I noticed that you used this type of antibiotic, but it actually would have gone bad in this amount of time. And I was like, okay. I wrote that book 7 years ago, but thank you for the advice.
You hit reply and go, it's fiction, right?
I think I replied and just said, thank you. You
Yeah,
know a lot of things.
yeah, words of wisdom. Do not engage on those kinds of conversations. Don't do it.
Not
It's
worth
not
it.
worth your time. No, no, no. So I guess the most important question I ever ask on this show I started asking this question. I thought it was a really great question. I always ask people, all right, so I'm standing there at your table. We're at a book show. I'm looking at your book. I'm like, I don't know if I want to buy it. Give me your pitch about your book as I'm standing there.
Oh gosh, yeah, I'm actually really bad at this. So thank you for asking. I usually say it's a dual timeline with a modern day timeline and a timeline from 1943 that focuses on a woman who is about to become famous, but she is a daughter of Italian immigrants working in a POW camp on U.S. soil. And then the modern day timeline is her granddaughter doing a documentary about her. So, and then I also say there's Thornbirds vibes.
Oh, very good. Very
Yes.
good. Okay. Okay. I love it. I love it. Yeah, I started asking that question because I thought, you know what? If I was a prospective reader watching the video, what would I want to know?
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's good. Well, thank you very much. I absolutely appreciate it. Um, as I said before, the most important question I ever ask on this show, without a doubt, is where can people find your books?
Well, you can find them on Amazon, and you can find them on Barnes and Noble, anywhere online where you buy books, you can find it there. So
And do you have a website?
I do. It's just emilybleeker.com.
Okay,
And
well
then
that's easy
you
to remember.
yeah, it's easy to remember. And you can connect with me on Facebook, Instagram. I have a TikTok. It's not always book related. So you might see some cats or some kids, but you're always welcome to join us in our crazy hijinks.
Very, very cool. Well, that's it for all things writing. I have to thank my guest today, Emily Bleeker, for being on this show. Emily, thank you so much.
Well, thank you for having me. It's been really fun.
Oh, it's my pleasure, and I always, like I said, I'm always in awe that people decide that they want to come on the show. I'm so humbled by the experience. But ladies and gentlemen, don't run, don't walk to pick up a copy of When We Were Enemies at your various outlets and Amazon, and go to the website. You can do all kinds of things. You're not going to regret it, believe me. Now, I want to thank you again for joining me on the show, but please remember, some people watching, please go hit that subscribe button so you can follow this show and know when these great videos come out, because just like this one, they're great interviews. They're fun interviews. You can also watch 5 Minutes with Brian. I still owe everybody another 5 Minutes with Drunk Brian. I did that before. I went back and watched it, and I went, wow, wow, okay then. But, I have to come up with something good to talk about for Drunk 5 Minutes with Brian. I'll get there. But for all things writing, on behalf of myself and my guest, Emily, thank you for watching. This is All Things Writing, signing off. This has been another amazing episode of All Things Writing. If you heard something that got your wheels spinning, check out the links in the show notes. Also, please follow the show and remember to leave those reviews. Those simple acts of kindness mean the world to us. Hop on over to briannowak.com, and that is Brian with a Y, and check out my latest novels. I'm on Amazon or wherever you buy your ebooks. And as a reminder, the music you heard on the show today was used under license from the artist Ryan Ancona. Thanks for listening to the show, and have a blessed day.